How y'all been doing? Okay?
Okay.
All right. This has been a pretty crazy week for us. Almost a lifelong friend of mine passed away this week. They've been dealing with a heart condition, but got COVID in the hospital, and he didn't survive. But that's been a little hard for us. But there's one sense in which I'm really sad, is for the family that he leaves behind and their need for him. And on the other hand, there's an envy I feel, because it'd be really cool to be where he is. I guess you'll need two of them there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I don't. Did you get one of those? Oh, all right. There you go. And you're set. No, I think everyone, you all got one there, right? Good. I just wanted to make sure you had some notes. Do I need to be back here for this? Can I stand here? Is that okay? All right. I feel confined behind the pulpit. Maybe I need that. I'm not sure. Here we go. We're in chapter 8 of Proverbs today. Chapter 7 and 8 and 9, all three of them have a pattern and a flow to them that looks very intentional in terms of the progress of what's being said. And so we're going to look a little bit at the beginning here at the comparison of chapter 7 to 8, and we'll look into chapter 8 specifically. But we're here in the context of Solomon is seeking to elevate the necessity of wisdom. That we pay attention to the wisdom that's available to us, and that we live our lives with understanding and with discernment. And from that, in the experience of our life, gain wisdom ourselves in the process of living it. But there's a whole pile of people that have lived a lot of life before us that have gained some wisdom, and it's good for us to listen to that. And that's part of what Solomon is saying. But we're going to learn today that there's wisdom that God has provided for us as the creator, the maker, who knows us better than anybody and knows life, the designer of all things that are here, and he's got some wisdom as to how this life best works. And we're going to be hearing about that in chapter 8 today. But in chapter 7, I've given you notes, and kind of the way I've given them to you is walking you through the text, and I've left you some space in between some of the verses there to make notes for yourself. But the last time we were together, we read the opening words to chapter 7. So I want this as a context for us. And in chapter 7, we have the seducer, the storyline here of the prostitute, of the unfaithful who is out to seduce, and in the case of the story in chapter 7, to seduce a young man. But the seducer speaks there in chapter 7. But it starts with Solomon saying, "My son, keep my words and store up my commands within you. Keep my commandments and you will live. Guard my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your kinsman. They will keep you from the adulteress and from the wayward wife with their seductive words." And then we have the description of the one who is foolish and simple and doesn't listen to wisdom. And the story there in verse 6, it begins with, At the window of my house I looked out through the lattice, and I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who lacked judgment. It was nighttime in the street in front of the house of the seducer. She was dressed to arouse sexual interest, and with an embrace and a kiss and reasoning, I am pure and no one will know, she led him inside. And he followed. Verse 21 says, with persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. And Solomon ends the chapter by saying, now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. That's how chapter 7 ends. And I mentioned last time that here we have the temptation of sexual immorality that is here, but it's also a picture for us. There are all kinds of temptations that come our way, that the seducer, the one Satan, would lead us away from what God has taught us, would lead us away from trusting Him, would arouse our passions, arouse our pride, and the things that work against us in our lives. So it's not just a matter of the sexual involvement here, but it's a matter of the temptation to not follow God's instruction or trust in Him. And that comes to all of us, all the time. It's like, what is it? Peter calls it a roaring lion that seeks whom he may devour. Satan's on the prowl. And I said, we just got to keep our guard up. Paul said in Ephesians, we fight a spiritual battle. And it's a battle that's constant with us. But it's a battle that's ours to win all the time as we rest in Christ, trust in Him, and obedient to Him. Listen to His wisdom and follow it. So we find here in chapter 8, we're going to move on with it here. In the contrast of the two, in chapter 7 we have the seducer who is speaking, and in chapter 8 we have wisdom who is speaking. And so the two are in contrast to each other in terms of the content that's given to us here. We have the seducer who ends in death, and we have the wisdom who ends in life. And so we're going to talk about this. It's interesting that wisdom is not treated here as a virtue. It is a person. The wisdom speaks out as a person, personified person here. And that created some issues for me as I'm reading this passage, and I said, what is it really saying here? What is the content? Am I getting it all? And so we're going to talk. I'll give you what I found, and then we can all go to seminary together and find out how to get it right. But in chapter 8 and verse 1, it begins here, does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights along the way where the paths meet, she takes her hand beside the gates leading into the city, her stand beside the gates leading into the city. At the entrances, she cries aloud. And so I just want you to note one difference here to start with. Wisdom, the personified woman who shows up in public places during the day, on the heights of the way, where all the paths meet, where everybody is, that's where wisdom hangs out. In chapter 7, the seducer hangs out in the dark, lurking in front of her house, her lyre. So, you know, here we are as the contrast of one's in darkness and one's in light. And I also notice here that wisdom is speaking in first person, not third person. So Solomon's not talking about wisdom as a third person. The wisdom itself is speaking and is related to as her, a woman. And what I first noticed is this is not, chapter 8 it doesn't come off as Solomon speaking to his sons, as Proverbs has been up to this point in time. But what we have now is wisdom itself speaking and making requests of us. And so I noted here that wisdom makes 4 requests that I've identified, and we're going to start looking at some of these. In verse 4, to you, O men, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind. So my message is for everybody. You who are simple, And by the word simple that's translated here is also translated foolish. In Proverbs, it goes either way for whatever reason, but simple and foolish are the same Hebrew word. It says, you who are simple or foolish, gain prudence. Gain wisdom that gives you good reasoning and making good choices. Being cautious about how you live your life, being prudent. Making the best out of the circumstance, situation you have, because you're guarding your life, you're prudent about it. You know, we talk about being prudent in your handling of financial affairs. Well, wisdom is saying be prudent about handling the affairs of your life. It says, so gain prudence, O simple, foolish one. And then he says, and then you who are foolish, repeats the word again, gain understanding. So, he's asking two requests that come here: gain prudence and gain understanding. And how do you gain understanding? And I said, the best thing I come back to, I said, how have I learned things? It's because I've asked questions. Something happened and I said, why? Or something happened and I said, well, what just happened? Well, what were the dynamics in this? And so I came into life with a curiosity, and that's been helpful to me in gaining understanding in how things work, how things function. It's like I told you this morning, wisdom lost me today. I climbed in my car without wisdom checking how much gas do I have. So I'm halfway here and the gas light's on. I'm going, let's see, I have a gallon of gas left, usually, if the light comes on. That'll give me close to 20 miles, but I'm 22 miles away. I don't think this is going to be a good thing. So wisdom did make me stop, but it delayed my time in going this. So somewhere in this, wisdom would have checked the gas before you left, right? You would think. And so I come down and I say, okay, simple one. Gain some prudence here and make sure your gas tank's full. Don't run it to empty, and gas it down. Be careful. Gain prudence, gain understanding. And then wisdom then makes a third request, beginning in verse 6. Listen. He says, gain prudence, gain understanding, and listen. And so I asked, why? Well, wisdom gives the answer right away. For I have worthy things to say. Listen up, wisdom says. I've got things that are of value to you. So listen to me. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true. For my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them are crooked or perverse. To have discerning, all of them are right. They are faultless to those who have knowledge. So why do I gain prudence and understanding and listen to wisdom? Because wisdom's counsel is right, true, and just. You want to get it right, you want it to fare well for you, listen up to wisdom. So in verse 10 it says, choose my instruction. That's the next request made. Choose my instruction instead of silver. Choose knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire compares with her. So wisdom is simply saying, what I have to offer to you is worth more than all the gold and silver you can accumulate. You can't find more wealth than what you're going to find in the wisdom I have to share with you. Pay attention to me. Listen to me. I'm giving you the keys of life. So the question I was looking here is, it's in first person all through here. I open my lips, I do this, my mouth speaks, choose my instruction. So all this is in first person. And in case there's ever a question, right here, again in the middle of the conversation that wisdom is having, In verse 12, it says, I, wisdom. Just in case you didn't lost it, I'm the one who's speaking. I am wisdom and I'm speaking. And it says, dwell together with prudence. Live your life together with prudence, with common sense, with sensibility, with care. And wisdom says, I possess knowledge and discretion. I know how things work. I know where things are going. Listen to me. I know. I have knowledge. And I have discretion. My wisdom will help you make good decisions in choices between things, to be able to discern what is a good path and not a good path, to discern what will be profitable and what will not be profitable, to discern if this is appropriate for me or not appropriate for me, to discern who I am and who I'm not. Discernment comes from wisdom. And these are all things that we seek. You know, you could ask that question of yourself. Well, who are you? You know, what do you got to give to life? What is it that are your strengths, your points of, you know, that your inclinations, your aptitude? What is it about you that makes you different than other people? What is it about you that gives value to your participation in life, in your participation with a group of people or in a family? How do you know what that is? It comes out of discernment. Well, I can tell you I've discerned a few things because I've lived a few years. So I have a little bit of practice in this. I've discerned some things, and that is that if it involves a lot of detail, you probably don't want me. I tend to be singular focused on several things at the same time, but I'm singularly focused. I know that, and I'm full energy, straight ahead on what I'm doing. If it's got a lot of detail, that just is like, it's like trying to run a race in knee-deep mud. You know, it's muck to me. And so that's just me. I've discerned that in my life, that I tend to get bogged down in detail. I've also discerned some things, is that if you've got something moving and happening and going, you just want somebody to manage it, to keep it going, you don't want me, because I like to start things. I like to do new things. That's me. See, that's discernment. And part of that discernment has come in reading the scriptures and seeing how people are, see how they live and see the differences of theirs, see how God has a place for all of us. We are His creation. He knit us together in our mother's womb. We're His design and for His purposes. So God, give me understanding, give me knowledge about who I am, give me understanding of life and me, give me good discernment, and that comes in the wisdom that I gain from wisdom from God. So we're going to keep working here, and I hope you'll track with me down the path. Said, so, dwell with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. So, when is it pride moving me? When is it arrogance? Is there behavior about me that's evil? Is my speech perverse, or is it helpful? Verse 14, wisdom says, counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have counsel for you, and I have sound judgment for you. And I have understanding, and I have power, the ability. And the power here is related to the statement that follows in verse 15. By me, kings reign and rulers make laws that are just. By me, wisdom, princesses govern, and all nobles who rule on earth. My wisdom has power to it because I give good discernment, knowledge, and understanding to people who rule over others. And he gives and makes the wisdom here speaks of, I give all of this understanding, this counsel, so that you can govern well to the benefit of the people. and not to your own accumulation. See, we don't know much about that in our cultures today, around the whole world. If you rule, you grab and gain all that you can get. And I said, that's sad, because it doesn't serve the people to whom you have responsibility before God to rule over. But anyway, wisdom gives you that, the ability to rule well, to make laws that are just. And then in verse 17 is an interesting phrase, I love those who love me. Wisdom says, I love those who love me. I love those who love wisdom. And those who seek me, who seek my wisdom, who seek me, will find me. And I said, I think I've heard that phrase before, but we're going to come back to that. Verse 18, with me, wisdom says, are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than fine gold. What I yield surpasses choice silver. My investments are far greater than the best silver you can find. I walk in the way of righteousness, along the paths of justice, bestowing wealth on those who love me, and making their treasuries full. So wisdom is saying, listen to me, and it will go well for you in your life. You probably can observe people around you. I think everybody here has lived long enough to observe people who are wise in the choices of their life, and they're wise in their businesses and their investments. And you know their financial status, their settledness and about life, as opposed to someone who has not been wise, who has spent all of the profit that they make, and they've never invested and never helped anything grow. They've lacked some wisdom in that. You've probably observed people like that. You've probably observed some people in your youth who are not wise about their study in class. And the day of judgment comes. I think they call it the test. And you come down and you pass or you don't pass. You move ahead or you don't move ahead. You gain stuff in your backpack that's going to get you further down the trail, or you don't. So wisdom plays a part in all of that, and it has an impact on the end result of what is the level of wealth. What are the words here? Riches, honor, enduring wealth, prosperity, yield, and that in the context of being righteous and being just. So wisdom has a good thing to pay attention to, I think. The promise of treasure is for us. And there's a list of these treasures that we've just been reading through, and we'll come back and visit those. But this is an interesting part here in verse 22 about wisdom. Wisdom in the time of creation of all things. Because wisdom, speaking here, claims to have been present. So I'm looking at this. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was appointed from eternity, from the beginning, before the world began. Wisdom is making this statement about herself. Okay? And I'm looking at this, just a minute. Creation, as I understand it, was an act of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image, God said. And it's clarity to me that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit were involved in creation in the time, in the statement in Genesis. And so I'm asking, is wisdom who's speaking here an attribute of God, the Godhead, or a member of the Trinity? Because it certainly sounds like that, the way she's speaking. I'm going, what is this? Now, it can't be. There's only a Trinity. There's not a quadruple or whatever a four-party would be, a quad something. But, so I'm asking, what is the role of wisdom here in the context of creation? Is she talking about it? In 24, it says, when there were no oceans, I was given birth. And that's not a good translation of the Hebrew there, but that's Ed speaking. But I have a whole lot of other counsels that I've been reading, and the commentaries I'm reading say the same thing. It's not a good call. It isn't that wisdom was born, but it was the idea that wisdom was brought forth. That's the inclination of the word used in Hebrew here, translated to give birth, is to bring forth. And it's not necessarily a birth like we think of a child being born, but it's more in terms of the child coming forth. And so, anyway, that may help you. I was brought forth when there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills. I was brought forth before he made the earth. Now who's he? Before he made the earth, or his fields, or any of the dust of the world. I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundaries so the waters would not overlap his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. And then a curious statement, verse 30. Then I was the craftsman at his side. That sounds like involvement, tangible involvement in creation. And wisdom. Why in all the years of reading the book, I've never picked this up and reading to understand this passage in this way. And as wisdom said, I was filled with delight day after day. And that takes me back to Genesis at the end of every creation day, and God said, it is good. So I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. So who is this wisdom? What is this wisdom? And what's her role in creation? That she would regard herself a craftsman at his side. Well, having gone through all of this description of the treasures that are ours in wisdom and wisdom's place in creation, the request is repeated to listen in verse 32. Now then, my sons, listen to me. I've got something to say to you. Blessed, that means happy, content. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction and be wise. Do not be ignorant in it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But whoever fails to find me harms himself, and all who hate me love death. So the ways of the seducer and the ways of wisdom have been told. And the contrast is pretty clear. One leads to death, one leads to life. One is the way of the simple and the foolish, and the other is the way of the wise, the understanding. And wisdom says, the choice is yours. Follow me and live. Ignore me and die. Now, obviously, there's something in this to understand. We all die. That's the nature of the human body we live in. But I have to keep coming back and reminding myself and a lot of people around me that I am not my body. I live in this body. This body is temporal, but I'm eternal. And so the question is, what is the quality, the character of life now for me? Am I a living dead, or am I alive? And when my body is done, do I live for eternity with God, or do I live for eternity apart from Him? Do I live in light, or do I live in darkness? And I said, that's my choice. And it's the condition, the crux is, do I follow wisdom or not? That's chapter 8, giving words to us. I make 4 observations to us here. And I need to do these quickly with you. But the 4 observations. The first one is the treasures, and that's what I titled my the treasures of wisdom today. The treasures that wisdom produces. And that list begins in verse 5 and takes us through, well, actually to 32. But I rewrote in your notes, I rewrote the passages there, and I highlighted what are the treasures that are listed. And I bold-faced those. He says in verse 5, you who are simple, gain prudence. Prudence is one of those treasures. And you who are foolish, gain understanding. Understanding is one of those treasures that wisdom brings to us. And I look back down to verse 12, and I see wisdom, I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. And whatever wisdom possesses is ours if we seek her. See, we seek wisdom. Knowledge is ours, that's a treasure. Discretion, that's a treasure that comes with wisdom. I'm looking at verse 14. Counsel and sound judgment, understanding and power. Those are treasures that come with wisdom. I'm looking at verse 17. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. The treasure is we have access to wisdom. Seek me and you'll find me. So wisdom is not hidden from us. It isn't running from us. It's available to us if we seek it. And 18, these are more treasures. Riches, honor, enduring wealth, prosperity. The return of your investment is better than fine gold, than choice silver. Those are treasures for us. And then I noticed in verse 20, I walk in the way of righteousness and along the paths of justice. Those are treasures that are ours because we follow God's wisdom. The wisdom that's spoken here. Look, I'm getting to my point here closely. But the way of wisdom, righteousness and the paths of justice are ours. And they bestow wealth, and our treasuries are full. Those are the treasures that come to us out of wisdom. And then I'm looking at verse 32. Blessed. And the word blessed means be happy. And the Hebrew word is happiness, happy. The blessed person is the happy person, the content person. Not giddy happy, but content inside happy. In verse 33, and when we listen to in wisdom's instruction, we are wise. We will be wise. And then in verse 35, we'll find life and we'll find favor from the Lord. Those are treasures that I identified out of all of that conversation that wisdom had. Treasures that are ours when we seek it, when we follow the wisdom. A second observation I have here is that familiar phrase I mentioned to you here in verse 17. Says, seek me. Get it here in my notes. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. This is wisdom speaking. And I said, I've read that phrase someplace before, but it didn't seem to me be in the context of wisdom. So what is this about? And so I did my word search, and I found that in 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 9, this is a conversation of God with Solomon, who wrote Proverbs. Got it? Okay, so this is a conversation with God to Solomon, and he said, and you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father, the father David, and serve him with wholehearted devotion and with a willing mind, for the Lord searches every heart and understands every motive behind the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will reject you forever. And so the thought is, if you seek God, you'll find him. But we're reading here in Proverbs 8, if you seek wisdom, you'll find her. Now I'm going, how's this? I'm not understanding. And then I read in Jeremiah 29, verse 13, God says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And so I have two contexts here of wisdom saying, seek me and you'll find me. And I have two contexts here. God says, if you'll seek me, you'll find me. Is there a parallel between wisdom and God? And so that's the questions that are in my head. And then the third observation I make here is the role of wisdom in creation in Scripture. I go back to Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19. It says, by wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. And by his knowledge the deeps were divided and clouds let brought the dew. So what do you see here? Wisdom, understanding, knowledge. That's all been talked about here in chapter 8. It's by wisdom that the Lord did this. So the wisdom speaking is the character, the quality of wisdom and understanding that belongs to God. So I'm asking. So we keep looking here. And in Jeremiah 10:12, it says, "But God made the earth by His power. He founded the world by His wisdom, and stretched out the heavens by His understanding." And so I'm coming to this, and it says, okay, wisdom is a player. It's idea content. It's guidance. It's mental, and it's related to God. And so I'm going a little further, and I make my fourth observation here, and that's what I'm finding are the parallels of wisdom and Jesus in creation. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the past God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, and through whom He made the universe." The writer in Hebrews is saying, God spoke, and in the last days He spoke through the Son, and through whom, the Son, through whom He made the universe. So Jesus is, in Hebrews here, is appointed as being an agent of creation. In verse 3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. And then you know passages that all of you here this morning. John chapter 1, first verse. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. And the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." And so the Word we know in the context here is Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was God. Was with God and was God. And through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. So He made everything. And then we get even clarity. Colossians, we looked at a year ago. Chapter 1, verse 15. "He," Jesus, "is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, rulers or authorities. All things were created by Him and for Him." And so we're finding here that Jesus in the Godhead is the agent of creation. And I go back to that Proverbs 8, and I say wisdom was present and was a craftsman alongside God. So what is this? And then I read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24, "To those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." That Christ is the wisdom of God and the power of God. And I see then in 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 30, "It is because of Him, God, that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God." He is wisdom. And then I had one last verse there, and that was in Colossians chapter 2, verse 2. And this was a statement to the believers in the city of Laodicea. Paul was making a statement. "My purpose is that they," the people in Laodicea, "may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." And so I come out of my study at this point in time and I say, wisdom speaking in chapter 8 is Jesus, who is the wisdom of God. I could make a case that wisdom here is a part of present in creation was the Spirit speaking. But I don't have passages or statements that are as clear as these, that he is not called wisdom as Jesus is called wisdom. And so I'm weighing all of this, and that's why I look at this passage and I say the words of Proverbs are more than the words of Solomon to his sons. They are the words of Jesus to you and me. And I said, don't take them lightly. They are words of wisdom and instruction from the one who offered his life in your behalf, so you could enjoy a personal, intimate relationship with God himself. I come away from 8 and I just say, this is not a bunch of advice. This is words from God himself. This is word from Jesus, who loved us and gave himself for us. And I said, I can't take these lightly. I need to be serious about them. I need to deal with them. I need to listen to the wisdom that he gives. So I leave you with that this morning. And we have the privilege of communion now. But, Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for your word to us. Lord, there's so many things that we read and sometimes are not clear. But it is clear that wisdom does speak, and that wisdom has good counsel for us. If in fact, as we find and read in the verses we've read and the statements you've recorded in your word, that Jesus is wisdom, your wisdom, or that we would learn how to listen, be responsive, not to take lightly. May we enjoy the treasure that comes with being followers of wisdom, followers of Jesus. We thank you in his name.